The annual meeting and investor conference of the World Federation of Investors took place on 25th and 26th September in Vienna. The annual meeting and conference, which were co-organized by the Austrian Association of Investors, took place in the renowned Villa Klimt and at the premises of the Raiffeisen Bank Sky Lounge, along with a diverse accompanying program.
Vienna was always a meeting place. Vienna, we had lots of interesting conferences in the past. 200 years ago, we had the Vienna Congress, and I thought it was just about time to bring all these interesting people to Vienna, because Vienna sees itself as a bridge point.
The eminent participants, representatives of 57 national associations of investors, various banks and corporations, Austrian Ministry of Finance and Central Bank, Vienna Stock Exchange, and many others, were in the framework of the conference discussing financial education and banking, as well as business activities in Central and Eastern Europe and Russia.
The economies in Central and Eastern Europe, specifically in Southeastern Europe, have to undergo important structural reforms. While the last 20 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was an inherent growth momentum due to the transformation process and the concentration on EU membership and many other things. After Lehman, that changed. Now it is much more difficult to develop growth, and that will be only possible if governments adopt structural changes. That means reform of the legal system, privatizations, improvement of private capital, the reforms of the pension system. I know Slovenia, I think from the past at least, quite well. People are very hardworking, and you will easily do it because the nation is small and very industrious, and I'm very positive about the future of Slovenia.
Despite of all stock exchange discussions where to list, companies have to be prepared and willing to do good investor relations with the markets, to invest money and time also to work with capital markets, to work with investors. If a company wants to list on a second market, then I think there have to be reasons for that. There will not be so much liquidity if there is no business perspective or activities. If you have a closer look to the Slovenian companies listed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, you will see that the vast majority of liquidity is done in Slovenia on the home market, not at Warsaw Stock Exchange.
Actually, we have invested in Croatia and Slovenia. We have 5 stop shops in Slovenia. And there are formats and products where you can invest in these countries. What we wouldn't invest is a large office building, for instance, or things which in the end have to go to institutional investors, which are typically not located in those countries and which are not inclined to invest in small SEE countries. That will change or might change in 5 or 10 years, but given the current circumstances, that prevents to invest.
The Pan-Slovenian Shareholders Association, vzmd President, Mr. Christian Verbic, also attended the events in Vienna in the framework of this year's 7th tour of the vzmd International Business Investment Programs Invest to Slovenia and International Investors Network. Mr. Verbic arrived in Vienna directly after he had been actively involved in the activities of the Slovenian business delegation, whose 4-day trip to an important Russian region, Yaroslavl, had been organized by the public agency Spirit Slovenia. On this occasion in Vienna, the representatives of the World Federation of Investors were otherwise informed about the recent events related to the shocking expropriation of shareholders and bondholders of the Slovenian banks, and about the letter which has recently been sent by vzmd to important international financial institutions. The eminent participants have expressed their concern and surprise over such conduct and over the inaction of the regulators and the competent institutions.
We talked about the vzmd actions with the larger banks in Slovenia, And it parallels a situation we saw in Spain, where banks had, so to speak, a stress test that was imposed internationally. In Spain, the national government approved it, the national bank approved it, the auditors approved it. All the people approved, saying the tests were done properly. We go to Slovenia and say the same thing. Oh, the tests were all done properly. 2 years later, the data is showing that the tests were not done properly. And what's the effect of that? In both situations, banks had issuances. Investors, individual people, invested in these banks. Many people put in their life savings in these banks for a good return. And 2 years later, find out that the data was not accurate, fraudulent, perhaps. And did the government agency catch that? Did the auditors catch that? So there's a greater need for oversight, and there's a greater need for independent entities like the World Federation or the organization in Slovenia to step forward. And that may not be popular. And it takes a great deal of resolution and I think sometimes financial capacity to take those steps. But somebody has to. Somebody has to speak for the individual investor. And if you can't rely on your bank, if you can't rely on the national bank, who do you rely on? So that's a big question then.
Some participants have already heard about these alarming actions and vzmd efforts. Since Mr. Verbic exposed the problems and vzmd endeavors in detail in May this year at the annual conference of the International Financial Litigation Network in New York, and in February and April at the conferences of the European Federation of Financial Services Users at the European Parliament and in Madrid. At the end of this international tour, vzmd President presented these acute problems again at the conference Better Finance in Brussels, where he arrived from Vienna. As a board member of the European Federation of Financial Services Users, Mr. Verbic in Brussels attended the presentation of the report Private Pensions, the Real Returns. As usual, suitable presentations of companies, institutions, and investment projects included in the two vzmd business investment programs, Investo.si and Invest2.net, were also provided this time during all occasions, events, and conferences. After this year's successful presentations in Belgrade, Bled, Bratislava, Brussels, Buenos Aires, Grodno, Copenhagen, Madrid, Montevideo, New York, New Delhi, Ouagadougou, Paris, Reykjavik, and Tehran, and last year's in Astana, Almaty, Bled, Baku, Brussels, Buffalo, Bucharest, Cape Town, Celje, Dubai, Vienna, Kiev, Ljubljana, Madrid, Minsk, Moscow, New Delhi, Tokyo, Toronto, and Zagreb. The two vzmd International Business Investment Programs continue to provide for their partners effective presence and presentations on 5 continents. If you would like to take part in our events and activities, you are kindly invited to contact the vzmd Investo.si Program Coordinator by phone +386 31 770 771 or email info@investo.si.